As the so-called international community once again meets to mouth political platitudes about stopping nuclear proliferation, many are now pointing to the numerous pieces of evidence demonstrating that, contrary to their official position, these very same governments are in fact invested in the proliferation of nuclear materials and nuclear weapons around the globe. This is the Global Research TV Backgrounder on GRTV.ca. When the Nuclear Security Summit in Seoul, South Korea concluded last month with a politically safe communiqué about the participants' resolution to make a safer world for all by aiming to secure all vulnerable nuclear materials in 4 years and strengthening the IAEA as a means of facilitating international cooperation, even Reuters was quick to point out the blandness of the document. Given the careful political platitudes about security and cooperation that dominated the summit itself, however, this was not an unexpected denouement to the meeting.
We've agreed that nuclear terrorism is one of the most urgent and serious threats to global security. We agreed to the goal of securing the world's nuclear materials in 4 years. We committed ourselves to specific and concrete actions, and to get this done, we agreed a new effort of sustained and effective international cooperation was required, that we would need to create an architecture in which we could share best practices, help to enforce many of the commitments that we had already made, and continue to improve every aspect of this issue.
What the vague rhetoric about securing nuclear materials, reducing stockpiles, and eliminating the threat of nuclear terrorism paper over, however, is that, exactly as in so many other political contexts, the operative definition of each of these goals is the exact opposite of what the politicians who are reading them off of teleprompters want you to believe. For years now, politicians have been using the specter of nuclear terrorism as a type of boogeyman to justify all manner of draconian crackdowns in the ongoing war on terror.
Investor Warren Buffett, who knows enough about calculating odds to have become one of the richest men in the world, quote, "The danger of a nuclear terrorist attack is the ultimate depressing thing. It will happen. It's inevitable. I don't see any way that it won't happen." Close quote. Is a nuclear attack by terrorists in the United States inevitable?
I still worry more than anything else, really, about the possibility of a group of terrorists acquiring really deadly capabilities. I mean, when we got hit on 9/11, there were 19 guys armed with airline tickets and box cutters. Next time around, I worry they may have a nuclear device or a biological agent of some kind, and would be in a position to inflict far greater damage and loss of life than anything we experienced on 9/11.
There are still too many bad actors in search of these dangerous materials, and these dangerous materials are still vulnerable in too many places. It would not take much, just a handful or so of these materials to kill hundreds of thousands of innocent people. And that's not an exaggeration, that's the reality that we face.
Left out of these grim assessments for obvious reasons are the pieces of evidence that detail how, quite contrary to the image of a beleaguered US government striving to keep nuclear material out of the hands of terrorists, that very US government has in fact been complicit in helping rogue networks and so-called nuclear terrorists to proliferate nuclear weapons to countries like Pakistan and North Korea. The most well-known nuclear proliferator was Abdul Qadir Khan, a Pakistani scientist working in Europe who passed detailed nuclear design information to his native government. The official history states that Khan was able to help Pakistan to gain the bomb, and then to spread that technology to the governments of North Korea, Iran, and Libya, without drawing the attention of the US intelligence apparatus. This runs precisely counter to Dutch economic minister Ruud Lubbers, who claimed that the CIA knew about Khan's activity as far back as 1975, but did nothing to stop him. The Americans wished to follow and watch Khan to get more information. Indeed, those who tried to stop such proliferation activities were actively hounded and prosecuted by American authorities. In the 1980s, Pakistani government operatives were trying to purchase equipment for their nuclear program from American companies. When the CIA learned of the deal, a sting was set up to catch the Pakistanis in the act, but 2 high-ranking US government officials tipped the target off, and he got away. When Richard Barlow, a CIA analyst, tried to blow the whistle on the illegal actions, he was forced out of his job and his career was derailed. In 2000, Atif Amin, a British customs officer, independently discovered the AQ-Con nuclear proliferation network in action in Dubai. When he tried to present the evidence to his bosses, his investigation was shut down. The police raided his home, and an Official Secrets Act investigation was started against him. Time and again, the network that helped to proliferate nuclear weapons internationally to some of the West's favorite arch-villains was allowed to continue with its operations unimpeded, despite being known about by Western intelligence. Other signs that the US is not as committed to stopping the spread of nuclear technologies as it claims to be are unfortunately all too abundant. From 1990 to 2001, former US Defense Secretary and longtime Washington insider Donald Rumsfeld sat on the board of ABB, a European engineering company. It was during his tenure on the board of ABB that the company closed a $200 million contract to supply components and design specifications for light-water nuclear reactors to North Korea. These reactors are capable of producing weapons-grade nuclear material that the nation, deemed part of the axis of evil during Rumsfeld's reign as Bush's defense secretary, can now use to hold East Asia hostage in its game of nuclear brinksmanship. Perhaps most galling of all is a program that has operated in complete secrecy for decades, in which the US has illegally supplied Japan with over 70 tons of weapons-grade plutonium. The program broke the laws of the US and Japan, as well as the spirit of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and was only recently uncovered after an exhaustive, decades-long investigation by Joseph Trento of the National Security News Service. I had the chance to talk to Trento about the program and its inherent hypocrisies earlier this month.
I think the people of Japan are going to have to start asking some very tough questions and not assume the honesty and goodwill that they've assumed in the past. It's too bad, but the reason I did the story it wasn't about Japan. It was about what the U.S. did to cause it and the U.S. role in proliferation. Because we are sworn through a treaty called the Non-Proliferation Treaty not to do this sort of thing. And we did. And we continue to do it. And so when we tell a country that's not a particularly nice country, doesn't have a good leadership, in our view, like Iran, that they can't do something, they point to these kind of events and say, but what? You did it. And this isn't the first time we did it. I mean, Dave Armstrong and I did a book called America and the Islamic Bomb, which was how we looked the other way as Pakistan got the weapon, because Saudi Arabia was our ally and had asked us to look the other way. And they actually diverted funds that were going to the Mujahideen in the fight against the Russians into their bomb program. So we have a history of this. We allowed India to work with Israel on their bomb. The Atoms for Peace program, which was the whole idea was to spread nuclear power around the world and give everybody access to cheap powder, ended up becoming a training ground, sort of a farm team for nuclear weapons scientists. So that's why we did the stories. The idea that Japan is the only victim of these kinds of weapons is now in a position of having to face up to the fact that its governments, and it isn't one government, it's a series of governments, have done this is really something they'll have to think about and confront and decide what to do about politically. That's something I can't answer. I mean, I'm sort of disgusted with my own country's behavior, so it's hard for me to look beyond that.
Perhaps in a certain sense, the title of last month's conference in South Korea is not a misnomer after all. The US government, Israel, and other power players on the global chessboard are interested in nuclear security after all. For them, however, security means the securing of a monopoly on the use of nuclear weapons, the securing of global governmental structures in the name of the nuclear scare, the securing of the IAEA's dominance over the regulation of the nuclear industry that has so openly bought and controlled them since its inception. And, of course, securing the fear in the minds of the public over the possibility of nuclear terrorism that they themselves have fostered and encouraged over the decades. Perhaps the most telling fact of all is that countries like Iran were not even welcome at the table during this summit. What better example is possible of the ways in which the nuclear powers think, act, and function as a monopolistic cartel? And exactly like any other cartel, they seek to secure the power to operate their racket free from competition by any other group. While delivering platitudes about reducing stockpiles and securing materials, the real aim of the nuclear community is to ensure that their extraordinary military power, the power to level entire nations and threaten entire continents at the push of a button, is kept out of the hands of the very peoples whom they constantly threaten with this power. This is the nuclear security that they speak of at these events. Security in their position of unquestionable military dominance. Security in their position as arbiters of what countries may have access to nuclear power and under what conditions they can achieve that access. And security in the ability to terrorize the peoples of the world directly through their own arsenals and indirectly through the implied threat of nuclear false flag terrorism. Until the underlying hypocrisy of this gang of nuclear thugs is pointed out, and their noble-sounding term, nuclear security, is unmasked as a smokescreen for military hegemony, such conferences will continue to assuage the world with their bland rhetoric about securing the world from nuclear weapons. And the proliferation that they pretend to fear the most will become a weapon of last resort to the nations that they have so pointedly excluded from their gang. For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com.